Hello, everybody, and welcome to this episode of Painted in Color. I'm co-host Lauren Brown, joined here by co-host me Araujo, and we are here to talk about art and fear. And I know that's a book title, so please don't come for us and copyright stuff. But this is a really relevant topic, and everybody and all stages of their career go through this, where there's a certain project or a certain new task or something that's out of their comfort zone that they don't quite feel like they can start it because they're so afraid to. And me and Mia also deal with this. So we just wanted to talk about what that felt like, how to overcome it, or how to at least face it and work with it. So it's definitely something that I'm going through right now. So like Mia, you were telling me about your experience before we started recording. So can you say a little bit about what's happening currently with your project?
Yeah, I mean, I can't talk too much about the details right now, but I think everybody knows that I am working on an illustrated novel, and it's it's going to be heavily illustrated, so it's not just one illustration per chapter. I'm hoping to do much more than that, and even if it was one illustration per chapter, it's a lot more art than I've made in 1 year or 2 years. You know what I mean? Like it's just,
Yeah.
especially in the past several years. I've mentioned this many times before, but for anyone who's joining us for this episode for the first time, I was working on this project while juggling a day job. So the times that I did get to work on my paintings, I was maybe doing 4 paintings a year, and the rest were drawings or sketches or studies. And basically what I'm faced with now is a lot more than that, that I have to do. And so I think it's just inevitable for, even if you've painted a long time. I mean, I've been painting for 13 or 14 years. To any time that you're presented with a bigger task than you're used to doing, like fear is one of the first responses,
Yeah.
But for me, it's been a persistent response, and it's something that I'm definitely battling with, and we can get into this later. But I think that I'm reading this book about habits and like how our brains work with anxiety and stuff like that. So like habits and anxiety and stuff. And I think that it's almost like when a certain emotion like fear becomes a habit response to something, then it, like, over time, it kind of it's harder to unstick from that. And I think that's kind of like what I'm dealing with, where it's like I'm so intimidated by parts of this process. And it's weird because it comes in stages. I'm writing and I'm illustrating, so there's, when I'm actually doing the illustrating part, I'm actually comfortable with that, and then the thought of writing is very intimidating to me.
Yeah.
And then vice versa, when I get really into the writing mode, the thought of drawing again, even though I've been doing that all my life, becomes very intimidating. And I guess the main thing that I want to distill with our listeners here is, like, if you're creating something that basically inspires fear, it actually means that you care very deeply about the thing you're making, because otherwise it wouldn't scare you. You would just be like, I can do this. And I don't even think it's a confidence thing. I think it's just you care to get it right, or to do it right, or to do it well. And I think that's a good thing,
Yeah, you're putting pressure on yourself
Yeah.
to make it perfect. And yeah, like it's something that I completely understand, because that's where I'm always at, where I'm like, okay, I could sit down and just draw something for fun, but I'm like, but why am I doing this? Like, I don't understand. Like, it's not going to be perfect. Or I was always afraid that my followers were going to be disappointed. The people who have been supporting me are going to be disappointed if I do like a bad piece, which at this point in my career, like, I'm probably not going to make a bad piece. Like, maybe it's not my best work, but who cares? You're not always going to make your best work every single time you're making a piece of art. But I was realizing that was scaring me from doing more illustrations that I could be doing.
Yeah.
Because I'm like, oh, it's not going to be my best. So like, why am I even going to do it? It's not my best idea. So why am I even going to do it? And I'm like, I could have all this work going on, but instead I'm psyching myself out of even starting a new illustration or starting a new series or whatever that could be. Yeah. So it's really frustrating. And I had to look back and recognize that was just all fear putting a block over my productivity. So it's something that I'm learning to dismantle. But yeah, I think that a lot of people are going through it, and a lot of, I feel like everybody I talk to has something in art or something at all that they're afraid of. So it's really interesting right now. What I'm going through is that I just came out of a big bad burnout, and I am in a place where I'm feeling a lot better now, and I feel more free. I have more time to do things that make me really happy. But when it comes time to actually sit down and start drawing again, I get afraid of going back into the burnout. So like, it's not even the art that I'm afraid of, it's the burnout itself. Yeah. That I'm like running away from. And so I'm trying to figure out how to overcome that feeling, because I was just there, and I'm like, I can't be back in that space again. Like I felt so awful and I felt so, miserable, and I couldn't do anything around the house. I wasn't motivated to really take care of things around here. And I don't want to go back to that spot, but the simple act of art isn't what got me there, but it was part of it.
Yeah.
And it was enough to scare me away from it.
Yeah. I think that's interesting though, because it's like, and I relate to this so much because a lot of the fear I think is associated with past experiences that are like by definition never going to be the same as the current one, right?
Yeah, definitely.
But it's kind of like, yeah, that fear is so programmed, they're so associated with creating for whatever reason, when it's like right now the difference is you can choose your schedule and you can choose to stop at a point before you burn out. But because it's still, that experience is still so ingrained, and I'm sure from over the years multiple times of burning out while creating art, it's like you're associating the two together. And it's the same with me. It's like when I sit down to paint, I'm still afraid of it, even though I've painted so many times. But it's like every time I think I'm just more comfortable drawing, so I associate more fear of failure or fear of,
Yeah.
whatever it is, fear of a million different things when it comes to painting versus drawing. So I can do one more easily than the other. But the irony is that avoiding it, which is my way of dealing with it sometimes,
Yep.
doesn't actually make me better. So it then it's like this loop, a habit loop,
Yep. Yeah, it's the same with me too, because I like even now, this experience was probably about, I think, 7 or 8 years ago. But back when I was in animation, I had a few like months where I got to be a character designer for a little bit. And it was something that I'd always wanted to do. I love drawing characters. And I guess like wasn't hitting the mark. Like, there wasn't really a style guide in place. So it was really hard for me to get the style. And eventually they were like, okay, like you have to go on something else. And I felt like so bad about that. And I felt that rejection.
yeah,
And so that fear of rejection actually stopped me from really designing characters after that point. And that was 8 years ago.
yeah,
And so I've had my career for a long time now, and I never really revisited that. And now, as a part of my job, like I'm actually in the character design pit again. And I was doing all my other work responsibilities, and I was doing every other responsibility before actually sitting down and actually focusing on the character design stuff, because I realized that was that old fear coming right back to haunt me of like, if I start doing this, like, is it going to be good enough? Am I going to be able to stack up? Like, what am I like? And I had to dispel that and be like, no, like you are a part of the team. If your designs aren't the best, that's okay. Like, because we're just getting ideas right now. It's all right. And I just realized that I was just like pushing it off and procrastinating because I was just afraid of that old rejection.
yeah,
And I'm like, that's what it was like the whole time. So it really does stop you. It's like a wall that goes up, because fear sticks in your mind as one of the most resonant emotions that you can feel. It's a survival mechanism. And so the fear of rejection, the fear of failure, the fear, like whatever that fear is like, that's just instinct trying to protect you from a bad experience again. But we have to know that that experience is not going to kill us. It's not going to, make us sick or poison us or anything. It's just something that we can do. So we have to dissociate that with the very primal fear that we have in our brains and realize that that fear is just coming from, I can't do this well this time, or like, we're afraid of rejection or afraid of like fail, whatever that is. We have to kind of untangle that and recognize it, and then put it aside. It's like, recognize that it's there, put it aside, and be like, okay, despite this, I'm going to do it anyway. And I'm going to accomplish what I set out to do.
Yeah.
Even though I'm afraid.
Yeah.
So
I think that's the most powerful thing ever, is like, you can't get rid of the fear. You have to do it anyway,
Yes. I have to do it anyway. I have to make money. It's my job. Like, I have to do it anyway. Yeah. I need to survive. Yeah. And that's honestly the definition of bravery too. So if you're afraid and you're doing it anyway, you're brave. So good job.
But yeah, I hear a lot of, younger artists too go like, I can't wait. And I used to say this too, where it's just like, I can't wait for the day where it's like, it no longer is scary to me. And I was talking to one of my mentors, Marshall Vandroff, actually about this. And he was like, fear is good. You don't want it to go away, because the opposite of fear is like, he was saying like, it's kind of like confidence, but he says sometimes confidence
like cocky.
is a bad thing. Yeah. So he was saying fear is good. You want to keep it, especially for an ambitious project. Like if you're not afraid of what you're doing, you're not pushing hard enough. And I was like, such a good point. Like,
that's a really good point. Yeah. And it is a good thing, because like, it's there to remind you what you have experienced up to that point. And so it's a marker of that you've lived through certain experiences in life and challenges in life, but either you solved them or you didn't. and you learned something, but the next time that you approach it, if you have that fear of experience, then that experience is going to help you do it better the next time. So
Yeah.
you can have that fear with you, but use that fear as a motivator to not fall into the same trap you fell into before. And
Yeah.
that's what I'm realizing that I have to do for myself, is that in order for me not to burn out, I have to prioritize my time. I have to make sure that I'm not, like, working too hard or not sleeping well. I have to make sure that I space out, like, the kind of task I have to do, break it down. So there's ways for me to not fall into the same pit I fell into before. But it takes some reflection to do that. But yeah, fear is healthy and fear does not go away. So it is really funny. I was like, oh, sweet summer children. Like, you think this fear is ever going to go away? Of course it's not. You
Yeah.
just, once you conquer one fear, you find something new to be afraid of anyway.
Yeah.
So I was like, what's
Right. Yeah. That's life for you.
life? It's life and it's okay.
Yeah. I'm wondering how you tackle something like right now, you're luckily not in this position, but like, for instance, like that big project that you recently finished, the
Oh
deck of
God.
wonders.
Yeah.
Did you know, like going into it, like obviously like that was a lot of work, but did you know going in like, oh wow, I'm going to burn out after this? Like how did you
No,
motivate
I didn't
yourself?
know it was going to burn out that bad. There was no way. I thought, no, see, here's my problem. I didn't have enough fear. So
But
should
that's
have been
it
afraid.
can be a good thing, right? Like to be
Hmm. No, I launched into this like, I got this. I'm confident. I know I can knock all these illustrations out. No, what? There was so much work. There was so much work.
yeah.
And I thought I was going to develop a shorthand. I had all these plans, and then I got excited, and I was like, oh man, I can do this style and make all these cards look so good. And then I realized that wasn't smart or efficient, and signed myself up for too much work. And a lot of it was my fault because I saw the roadmap in front of me and the amount of illustrations in front of me, and I did that style anyway. So that was my own fault for not taking into account the fact that I was going to have my full-time job to balance it. I was going to have, my actual life and a house to maintain and my own health to maintain. And I kind of put all that aside because I wasn't afraid enough. If I had that fear in the beginning, I would have planned better. I would have organized smarter. And so I wish I had a little bit of like self-awareness of that. Like, I know how I am. And now that I have had that experience, though, I know how to work with myself. So if I have to tackle a big project like that again, I know how to better space it out and plan it out. Um, Now, if I'm going to do a project that big again, probably not, if it's not for me.
Yeah.
But it does help to be aware of it. But yeah, no, I wasn't afraid in the beginning. I certainly am afraid now.
That's exactly how I feel. It's hilarious.
Really?
Yeah. In the beginning, I was just like, this is my project and do whatever I want. This is the best thing ever. And of course, it was the most like I wanted, the Fairies book by Alan Lee and Brian Froud. It has like
Yeah.
art on every page. That's what I wanted. I wanted art on every page.
Oh
And
man,
then
yeah.
over time, like as I'm developing this, I'm like, that is first of all not efficient to read a novel like this, like a
Yeah.
reading experience, because that's a very different book.
It's
And
too
so
distracting.
it is, yeah. But also I'm like, why the heck am I setting myself up for this? Like that's so but even the amount that I've like, whittled down to is still a lot. So it's just yeah, the fear is here now.
Yes. Yeah. And writing is a whole nother beast for me too, because when you do something that's not so far, but out of your comfort zone, something that you're not sure that you're confident in yet, it could be really scary. And so what I realized I was doing, like, okay, I would be like, wake up in the morning on the Saturday, and I'd be like, okay, I would make a declaration, get up out of bed. This morning, I'm going to go downstairs and take my journal and go sit in my nice chair and like start and write 3 pages of like whatever. Like, not a bad goal to set out. It's a good plan. I would go downstairs and look around my house and be like, actually, I could clean right now. I should totally clean. I'm in the mood to clean. I wasn't in the mood to clean. I was afraid. I was scared of writing because the idea of putting something down on the page and having to do something about it after it's done was terrifying to me, because I'm like, again, what if I'm not good enough at this? What if I fail at it? Which it's not even a thing. Like, you didn't start. Not starting is the failure. I'm like, what if this is trash and I'm writing something that's like going to be meandering, and just put the idea down on paper. I could just do that.
Yeah.
And so that's something else that I'm also trying to dispel. So like, how did you tackle like your, like the feet of writing.
I mean, actually,
You've never done it before.
yeah, no, actually, I grew up writing like in grade school, and I mean, I
Mhm.
was telling my sister the other day, like we remember our first like career day as little kids. I said I wanted to be an author and an artist. So
Really? Oh, you want us to be both?
I wanted to be both, and actually, all through college, I was actually minored in creative writing, but I had a really
Really?
terrible teacher, unfortunately. That yeah, terrible teachers can do this, unfortunately. But
Yeah.
I also internalized a lot of that, and so I didn't write for 13 years after college. So
Wow.
this project is my first time writing again, but and I think there's fear there too. Like it's actually similar to your character design thing. I was so traumatized from that experience in school that um I guess I was just convinced that I didn't want to ever write anything again because I didn't want to put myself in something because it felt so vulnerable, and it felt so vulnerable to be in that position. And all art is vulnerable. So that's another part of where fear comes from, that it's like you are putting something of yourself out there for people to see. And
Yeah.
it's the best kind of art has an honesty to it that can be really raw and really emotional. And actually, Nyla was talking about this on her interview, that even writing any kind of I guess like part of your past in any way, which I am definitely doing in this story, it dredges up a lot of memories that most people would rather forget. And so
Hmm.
I think that kind of project is especially difficult, you know? And so I think that's why it's been so slow for me. But in terms of getting back into it, it was just a story that I really wanted to write for my sister, and that's what drove it. You know, it's like I felt like no one else was going to write it, so I had to,
Yeah.
you know. So that is a great motivator. But so the getting started, I guess, wasn't as hard, but it was like the going on, because as you write, then you reread it and you're like, this is trash, so I don't want to continue, you know.
Oh
But it's
no.
like, so it's just been a lot of starting and stopping, like convincing myself to go on. And there's times where I'm like really into it and really loving it, but there's other times where it just feels like um Neil Gaiman has this great metaphor where it's like you're driving through the fog and you can't see anything.
Yeah.
And then after a while, the fog clears and you can see the view, and then it covers up again. And it feels a lot like that, where you're just going really slow. At least for me, that's how it feels right now. But
It's like an ebb and
um,
flow.
yeah. But
How
for
do you
some
can
writers, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh no, please keep going.
No, I was just gonna say, I hear some writers who like love writing, and I'm like, I feel like I'm an imposter because I don't feel that way yet, because it's still very fear induced. But I like, you know, it's I just think that it depends on the project, you know, like some projects are going to be harder, you know.
Hmm.
I don't know that
Yeah.
answered your question at all.
No, it does. And I think that there's oftentimes this myth that you're supposed to love it every step of the way. And that's
Right.
just not realistic. That's not how it is at all. Even with art, that's not how it is. Like
Yeah.
people, I mean, when people look at our careers, they think that we're just like drawing like doo like
Yeah.
just like in our sunlit rooms or whatever, like drawing on our easel with like, you know, like it's not like that at all. Like
Yeah.
it's just sometimes it goes really well and sometimes it doesn't flow and you have to force yourself through it or you have to walk away from it. And so like that illusion that it's supposed to be awesome and that you're supposed to be in a Starbucks and just writing and writing and writing and like you would just like have that, you know, that creative inspiration that just keeps going. Like that's a myth. So it makes you feel like you're not good enough because you're not feeling like that. Like you feel like you're stuck a little bit. And I
Yeah.
feel like that's just a normal part of the creative process. So it's not really fair for
Yeah.
people to see that and think that that's how it's supposed to be. Like everybody goes about it differently, but what matters is that you're getting it done.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, how do you convince yourself to keep going when you hit those walls?
I think at this point, there's a part of my brain that understands that the not doing is more harmful than the doing.
Mm,
And I'm not going to become a better writer if I avoid it, you know. And that's the thing, when I don't write, I read. And I've always been a reader, but I think around the time that I stopped writing, I stopped reading too. And so I'm almost like trying to catch up all the years that I didn't read. But
yeah,
actually that's inspiring too, is reading other writers write really well is inspiring to me to want to try. And then of course you try it and it's not as good, but what I think the motivation is, like, I know that they spent thousands of hours writing and that's how they got
yeah,
as good as they did. But
yeah,
also the other encouraging thing too is that you know, a friend of mine always tries to remind me is that we were reading the final draft, right? And same with the art, we see, like, I'm seeing the final draft of your painting
yep.
here, but we're not seeing the process. And so I cannot compare myself to the final draft I'm seeing here that involved editors, you know, and like most of
Hmm.
writing is rewriting. So that first pass is going to be terrible, but it's like, it's just, for me, it's like, I think the size of the task now is what's motivating. That's like, I have to do it, even if it's chipping away. And I
Yeah.
cannot let the amount of work I've done each day discourage me. I just have to keep going, you know?
Yeah.
So
Absolutely. Yeah, that's helpful to hear because it's something that I need to also realize that like, it feels like a daunting task when you look at the whole chunk of the like when the whole scope of the project. But
yeah,
when you break it down into like its reasonable chunks, it becomes more manageable and becomes less scary.
yeah,
But yeah, like I really like what you said earlier too about like the not doing is just more harmful than the doing.
yeah,
Like you have to move because oftentimes fear just stops us from doing anything. And that's harmful because then you're like, you look back and you're like, well, why didn't I do any of this work? Like I could have been doing all of this. Like even me, like I look back at, these years I've been working, I'm like, I didn't do as many illustrations as I should have done. I didn't do as much art as I should have done. I'm like, why didn't I do that? So that's what I'm afraid of is not leaving that behind.
yeah,
As I get older, like not having that established, like I need to establish it for myself and put, that track record, even the pieces that aren't that good, I want them there because they're all learning experiences. They all teach me something each time I go about it. And
exactly.
same with writing. Like I do, like even if it's bad, I love looking back at my writing and being like, I did that. Like I sat down and actually committed to writing something. And
Yeah,
it feels really good to see it. So that's much less scary than not having anything at all to look back at.
definitely.
I really like what you said there.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely know I heard it from someone. So whoever it was that like, but it stayed with me, and I wish I remember who originally said it. But yeah, it's just I think that with all these skills that we're like, they all take years to
They
develop, you know,
do.
and that's what's so difficult. I think it's such a paradox. We're looking for balance, and I think in the past artists didn't have to balance as much because there was either someone at home taking care of stuff because they were mostly male artists, you know, that had someone caring for
Mm-hmm.
the kids and doing all this stuff and they could just focus, and we compare ourselves to their output, you know, and it's a very privileged output to get to just focus on your art. And so it's
Yeah.
like I think that it's always going to be like this constant juggling of life and art that you want to make. And um yeah, I guess I don't want to beat myself up too much about the time that's been wasted in the past, but I guess the best I can do now is just try to get out of my own way. And fear is a big one that gets in my way all the time. And it's even just, I mean, I don't know about you, but even I think that in recent years with social media, we're so much more aware of criticism as well than we
Yep.
were even when we were in school. Like at school, the
Mm-hmm.
worst thing was being in front of the whole class as the teacher's critiquing your work, and you know, seeing nobody would ever be mean enough to heckle you from the, you know, the
Yeah,
audience.
because you could see their faces.
Yeah, exactly. But that's the worst it would be. And then everyone would forget and move on. But on social media, this stuff lives on and it can
They
be dug
do.
up again and just, and so I think that's another level of fear, at least for me, is just like how people will interpret your work and receive it. And
Mm-hmm.
you can't control that. And if you let that stop you, I mean, believe me, I mean, there's been multiple times that I wanted to give up just based on that fear alone. Um,
Yeah.
because it's scary. Like I said earlier, it's a very vulnerable thing to create art. And I think I'm still dealing with how to navigate my emotions around social media and art reception.
Yeah. Yeah, you have to kind of like it's easier to say than to do it, but you have to put a wall between you and that emotional response because obviously the negative comments and the things that people say are going to stick out in your head much more than the
Yeah,
positive comments will. But at the same time, it's a stranger. They don't know you. They don't know your experience. They don't know what you've been through to create what you've created. So I look at it as this is somebody who's coming from an ignorant point of view. And yeah, like it might have hurt in the moment, but I have to let it go because they don't know who I am. They don't know me.
yeah,
And as long as it's not catching wildfire, as long as I haven't actually done anything wrong, then I'm like, all right, like I can let this go. It's okay. Like it has to be okay. Because I remember like I made a piece that I really, loved that I posted on Twitter and somebody was like, oh, like she looks like this character. And it's like, it's a knockoff version of that character. And I'm like, I wasn't even going for that. Like, you don't even know. I'm like, you don't know my brain. You don't
yeah,
know what I was thinking about when I was making this character. You just made an assumption and a snap judgment.
yeah,
And, I did respond to it and I was like, hey, like, this is not like my inspiration at all. Like, I was like, you're just making assumptions
yeah,
and those assumptions are incorrect. So just know that.
yeah,
And the person actually did like rare apology on online, but they apologized and they were like, yeah, like I don't know what was wrong with me that day. So I always think of it like the people who often attack people on social media are people who have other things going on in their lives, and I try not to take it personally because it's not about you, it's about them.
Yeah. And I definitely get that. I guess I didn't want to make it feel like I, can be so easily discouraged by someone just not
Oh, no,
liking
no, no,
it.
no.
My
I
work
mean,
is
it's
definitely
still,
not for everyone.
yeah, it's still scary. And I'm not saying that, I mean, those feelings are valid to to be to be nervous about how people are going to respond, because sometimes it does go really wrong, and sometimes it does, it can get bad and people will try to cancel you or whatever. And just like so that's definitely scary and reasonable.
And it
Um,
happens to more marginalized people than not, or
yes,
like
yes, it
women
does.
especially, but yeah.
People are just more critical, which
Yeah.
is it's frustrating, but as long as you're doing it anyway, I mean, you put it out there, they're going to respond however they want. And like you said, you can't control that response.
Yeah.
So might as well do it
Yeah.
and see what
Exactly.
happens than
Yeah,
not do it.
definitely.
Yeah.
But I guess for anyone who has similar fears, I guess the thing that at least gets me by is just thinking like, my work is for my audience, like, and everyone else, like, it's fine. They are entitled to their opinion as well, and it's just as valid. And it's
Mm-hmm.
going to be uncomfortable to hear everyone's opinion about stuff, because I think artists just aren't really prepared for having that big stage,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
we're just not as prepared to process that many responses. But it's just something we're all having to deal with now
It's
by
true.
putting our work out there. So it's just, yeah, I
Yeah.
guess just like you said, though, I love that. Just don't let that get in the way of you creating the thing, and let you said something you said, you kind of said it now, but you also said it in a previous episode. I haven't stopped thinking about it, but there's a lot of self-worth kind of questions that come up where artists are like, what if nobody responds? And it's like the best you can do is just create it and put it out there and let the world decide what its value is. Like, I think that's
Yeah.
you said it, and I think that's so right on,
Mm-hmm.
and
Yeah,
even if you
because
don't agree with it, like, you might not agree with it, you might value it more than the audience does, but that's just part of the gamble of creating, is that you're
yeah.
taking a chance on a thing you believe in, and it might not always line up, but you still do it anyway because you love to do it. I'm saying you, but I mean me, but
Yeah, no, I know exactly. It's the royal you.
yeah.
I get it. Yeah. And there's so many pieces that I posted too that I'm like, I really like this piece. And like, it's just no one really responds to it. And I'm just like, ah, like it was actually funny because like it was comforting. On Twitter, somebody had posted like, what's your underrated piece that like you really like or into? And so a bunch of artists are just posting pieces that really didn't get that much traction when they posted it. And it was just kind of comforting to see. It's like, yeah, like everybody's gonna have pieces that they really loved and no one really saw it,
Yeah.
even if they saw something else that got a bunch of likes and views or whatever. There's sometimes pieces aren't going to hit like they did, or they didn't get posted at the right time, or they didn't resonate at the right. And it's like there's so many universal factors that you really can't control it. So again, it's not about it's oftentimes not about what you made, or like it's just about like when it hit, what the time is, but just make it and keep making it. And sometimes a piece will resonate, sometimes it won't, but that doesn't reflect that it's a bad thing or
Yeah.
that it's a bad piece. And it's good to have that ebb and flow too, because it shows you kind of like, the world is always changing every single day. You're not going to always make everything that hits, like you can't.
Yeah.
So, and it's that's fine. That's fine. Like, just don't let it scare you out of creating things because you're like, I'm not getting any followers, I'm not getting any traction. It's like, I think social media has definitely taken away the idea that we can just make for ourselves.
Mhm.
And it's nice to share it and it's nice to get feedback on it, but don't forget to make for yourself too. Like,
Oh,
because
yeah.
that's something I had been chasing for a while. And I just, I would stop because I'm like, oh, I'm scared of how people respond to this, or I'm scared that people like no one will like it. I'm like, I could just draw for myself though and just have fun with that.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So it's tough to do that, but it's you have to really try to be aware of that fear and like not compartmentalize it, but kind of break it apart and recognize where it's coming from and what's causing it. Because I think coming face to face with it really helps you to overcome it in the future, or at least like create in spite of it.
Yeah. And the funny thing is, it's usually irrational. And I think that that's because like fear is part of our old brain, and
Yeah.
it's like a more ancient part of our brain that hasn't like all the technical stuff, or the logical side is very new and very recent.
Yeah.
So it's like fear is a stronger response, and it always will be. And so that's why, even though it's illogical to fear the certain thing, it keeps getting you each time. It's like it's easily triggered is the word I'm looking for.
Yeah.
um but uh but yeah, it's interesting that book I was talking about, in case anybody else wants to read it. I'm not endorsing it, it's just one I find interesting. It's Unwinding Anxiety by Judson Brewer.
Mm,
And he basically is going into like how anxiety kind of originated in the brain to help us survive, like everything you're saying about fear, you know.
yeah.
But also why it's so hard to break bad habits and build better ones, because they are all very like emotion and memory based, you know.
Yeah.
And that kind of goes back to like any of the fears that we've associated for a long time about our art, like the things that we keep running up against. Some of them are just like have been going on for years, you know. And the way he was describing it is like, think of how many times over those years you've run up against this bad habit or this fear, let's say in this case. That's why it's not so easy to just like flip a switch and break that habit, because that's how many times like it's already been encoded in your brain, like how many layers of programming, if you will, that fear
Yep.
has been just like, you know, just really sunk in there. And I was like, that is such a great visual for me, because anytime I come up against any of these irrational fears about creating art, I'm mad, like, why can't I just get over it? And it's because it's going to take a while to unprogram all those instances, all those memories of fears of that same thing.
Yeah.
Anyway, I
Yeah,
found
it's
that.
just like when yeah, it's like just when you reach out and like you get burned on a stove, like you that fear response is protecting your brain from doing it again. So even though it's not something that's dire or life, like life ending or whatever, just like the fear of creating art, like that's encoded in your brain because your brain is just trying to protect yourself.
Yeah.
So like you really do have to face it and like don't feel so bad that you're afraid of it
Yeah.
because like it's just your instinct trying to keep you alive. That's all.
Yeah.
And our wires are crossed because like you were saying, we're not really hunter gatherers anymore. Like we're just like in a house or an apartment trying to create in a computer. And like it's not dire, but your brain still thinks it is. So just like be patient with it and
Yeah.
let it kind of like ease out of that fear and just again work with it and try to dismantle it because it takes a long time. That fear memory is one of the strongest memories you have in your brain. Oftentimes people's first memories are often fear-based memories, or they can be joyful, but they're also, people tend to remember the first time that they were afraid.
Mhm.
So it's just it's really hard to unencode that in your brain.
Yeah.
And so yeah, it's okay to be afraid, but just don't let it stop you. And the other thing I think is interesting with fear too is that it doesn't just come up when you're afraid of failure. Fear also comes up when you're afraid of success,
Hmm.
because I think the fear there comes from having to maintain that success and the attention that you get because you have done something that's successful.
Yeah.
Um, and I think that's where imposter syndrome comes in too, because then you think that you've tricked them or it's a fluke and you can't replicate what you did to create that success.
Yeah.
And so people often tend to run away from the possibility of growing more and getting more notice and attention for what they're doing. Um, I know that that's something that I often kind of have not shied away from, but just like it's kind of prevented me from doing more things that I knew I could do to build up what I was already creating.
Mhm.
And I'm also seeing that in like other people around me too, that like, I'm like, you could just like do this and you would be like amazing. And they're like, oh, like, I don't know. Like they waffle on it. And I
Yeah.
think that with some people deep down, they know that the idea that they have or maintaining what they're doing is probably going to start taking off. And that idea can be scary because it's like, okay, like what next? Like, will I be able to maintain it? Will I be able to handle it? Will I be able to handle the pressure of like having to create more and more? Um, I know personally for me with success, it's having to maintain it and staying on top of it because in the past, being somebody who tends to roll out of good habits and like, again, I find new ones. We talked about this on a bunch of episodes, but like having habits is okay if you have to break them and start new ones. But I'm like, what if I gain success off of one habit that I start to get bored of, or I start to like kind of roll out of? Like, what do I do then?
Hmm.
And so I've often been afraid of just like maintaining, like, oh, like I'm going to post a video every week, or I'm going to, do an Instagram live, or I'm going to do like blah, blah, blah. I get afraid of starting that habit because I'm like, well, what if I stop?
Yeah.
But then it's like, what if you do stop? Then what? Like, what is it? The world's not going to end.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
like, it's fine. So I think what I would say to myself and to people who might be struggling with that is like, even if you fall out of a habit that you find could be successful, it's okay because you've paved some way to that place and
Yeah.
you still created stuff on the path that you could have set out for yourself. If you stick with it, that's fantastic. If you don't, then maybe it wasn't meant, or maybe it wasn't interesting enough for you to keep it up, or maybe you got too busy, or maybe it wasn't the right time. That's okay, because you still tried something. I think that's what matters most, is that you have tried.
Yeah.
You have made an attempt there. It's much better than not doing anything at all. So I need to not be afraid of that for myself too, and just try something and see what happens.
That's
So
actually
yeah.
really great advice. And I think the reason why, at least for me, it makes me afraid is because a lot of people who don't understand how art is made think that it is very much a process like everything else, where it's like, once you have it, then it works the same way for everything. Where it's
No.
like, how many of these movies that have been runaway successes, and then everyone's response is try to mimic that same thing, instead of like, maybe it succeeded because it was different. Why don't we create a different thing? But
Yes.
the industry just kind of thinks like, let's repeat this thing.
No, it's a lot. It's a lot. But yeah, even with TikTok too, like the
Yeah.
things that are trending or are successful, like it's like you have to chase that constantly. There's
Yeah.
memes that go out of style within a few days. Like
Mhm.
it's just, so it's, like you can't stick to one kind of thing
Yeah.
and think that that's going to be the one thing that you always have to do. I mean,
Yeah.
some people can and some people do it well, but that's rare. And it's
Yeah.
okay to have to change up things every once in a while. It's okay to have to change your style or your business model, or what kinds of themes you like to have in your art. Like just try things and see what works and what doesn't. And
Yeah.
if something sticks for you, then great, that's cool. But it's actually not very often that people do stick with one thing for their entire career, or stick with one technique or one kind of habit, and that's all they do.
Yeah.
Like the people you hear about often, like they're, really successful artists and amazing people, they'll say like, hey, I have a routine, I wake up every day and do this, but not everybody's wired like that. That's okay. Like
Yeah.
don't feel bad if you don't function like that. Because I definitely don't. And I know that that's about myself now. Like that's just how my brain works. And I can't force my brain to be any other thing but the way that my brain is. Like I can learn new habits and pick up new skills, but I know that I'm somebody who just gets bored with one routine every single day. And I
Yeah.
don't want to do one routine every single day. It's
Yeah.
boring. Maybe 3 months, cool. Okay, find a new one.
Yeah.
And that's how I keep it interesting. So it's okay. Don't feel bad.
Definitely. I mean, one thing that you said that I love too is that if you did succeed at something and you fear falling off of that, it's almost like proof that then you can't succeed again because you don't want to do it that way. But actually, I see that that's proof that you succeeded at something, which means you could succeed at
Yeah.
something else. It doesn't have to be in the exact same way. But again, with this sort of sameness thing, it's like, if it's not the same system, we just assume we can't do it. And that's how I felt with this book. It's like, I feel like I have like anything I've succeeded in the past has not been this, so it doesn't prove that I can succeed at this. And the way my therapist is trying to help me think is like, you've succeeded at different things, why can't you succeed at this?
Yeah.
Like
There's
anyway.
not, success doesn't look like one thing.
Yeah.
There's not one measure of success. Like success can look like anything, and what success means is subjective to the person that it's applied to.
Yeah.
Like for example, like when I was like years ago, when I was back on Tumblr of all places, I remember the first time I got 10K likes or like reblogs or whatever it was, and I was like so excited about that. And for a while I couldn't replicate that, and I'm like, was that like it? Like, is that what people want to respond to? But then later down the line I tried something different, and that thing got even more likes than that last thing. That was like, I was able to go viral other times,
Yeah.
and it was like with a completely different thing.
Yeah.
And so success does not have to look like the same thing over and over again. It can be many different things, and you have to define what successful looks like to you. And oftentimes our idea of success looks like what somebody else's idea of success is. It looks like, these big artists that we look at, that we put on a pedestal, but really success sometimes for some people, I got out of bed today. I got out of bed before noon, or I was able to go outside for a walk and like, work out. Or success can be like, I was able to get on the stage and like talk to somebody, talk to like an audience of people, or I was able to have one conversation. So redefine what your measure of success for yourself looks like, and build yourself up to where you want to be. But again, those measures of success look different to other people, but it's okay to see those small victories as successes as well, because they're all stepping stones to get you to where you want to go.
Right. Yeah. And I love what you said too about the fear of success in terms of the audience, because it's more people to disappoint, right? That's the way you look at it.
That's the way you look at it.
Yeah, but actually, like, that's a common fear I see with people who have Patreon pages, like artists
Yeah.
pages, where it's like there's now that they're paying you money, you're so much more afraid of letting them down and feeling like you're never doing enough. And I feel this every day.
I feel this every day too.
Yeah. But the thing is that most of the times when you are just like honest and tell your supporters what you're actually going through, they tend to be really understanding, even if they themselves are not artists. And so I think we tend to, I don't know, just like we tend to be our harshest critics, so we assume everybody else to be. And there are really harsh critics out there that expect you to be successful. Once you're successful, they expect you to continue that streak, otherwise you've lost it, and they just don't matter.
Yeah, they don't. I mean, because it's usually just like 1 out of like 100 people who are actually here to see you continue to work through whatever you have to work through, and they're just excited to see when you do post, and that's really it. They're like, oh, they posted again, yay, I'm happy to see you back, and they'll still be there. Yeah. So it's okay. Like even if you have like a Patreon and you like lose followers or something like that, like I don't take it personally, because I'm like, yeah, like I understand, like I hadn't posted in a while, so I get it. And or sometimes like, oh my god, maybe they don't have the budget, and that's fine. Like, because like I think about the patrons that I have unfollowed over the years, and I'm just like, yeah, I just didn't have the budget to deal with it. That's okay.
Yeah,
it's not a reflection on you, and maybe it is, or maybe but it doesn't matter, because for the patrons that are still there, that's what matters. Like, look at the audience that is still there. Yeah. Look at who is supporting you.
Yeah.
So, and if you feel like you really can't do right by them, you have to take a break, that's okay to acknowledge that too.
Absolutely. And that's not failure either,
It's not failure. You're prioritizing yourself, and that's definitely not a failure.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, it's about being realistic. So what are you going to do about your fear? Like, what do you do, like techniques to handle your fear? Like, do you just like talk to yourself? Do you psych yourself up? Like, how are you going to overcome your fear after we get off this podcast today?
Oh man. I feel like the things that help is talking to either my therapist or friends, about it. Like, usually talking about your fears with people, it puts it in, they're an outside perspective that can give you more clarity. And the thing my therapist has had me do is like write down the things I worry about and then write down how it actually turned out. And usually that fear is just something that's internal,
Yeah.
But actually, just from what we were saying earlier, just doing the work that scares the crap out of you, like that's how I get out of it. And it's not, like, again, easier said than done, but I'm just trying to be more like present at the moment and like feeling that fear right now, and just knowing that that's just the resistance from the thing I'm actually wanting to do.
Yeah.
It sounds so simplistic when I say it that way, but that anxiety book that I'm talking about is saying, like, every time that trigger comes up where it's like in my case, the fear comes up and my behavior is to avoid, because I want to hide from it, and to catch myself when I'm tempted to hide, and to just do the thing that scares me, do it badly. Who cares? Doing it badly is better than not doing it all. And
exactly.
So that's what I've been trying to use lately, but it's hard. It's really hard.
Yeah, at this point in my life, I actually kind of appreciate the fear, because if I feel fear, it means that it's probably something that is worth doing. Yeah, I'm nervous about it. Yeah. If I feel indifferent, then I'm like, okay, if I don't feel anything towards this task, it's probably not even worth doing. So, like, when I feel the fear, I'm like, okay, like I kind of get excited, because I'm like, oh, like, this is probably something good, because I'm a little nervous right now. Like, it means that it's probably going to be something that is going to require some problem solving. It's going to be something that I think a lot about. It's going to be something that like might impact something. Even if it's one person, I'm like, oh man, like I hope it's good for this one person who's going to see it. But it means that it's usually worth doing if I'm afraid of it. So I'm excited to see it, because that means I've thought of something that is worth doing. And that's cool. Yeah. So in order for me to get over it, I have to start breaking it down and start seeing like visualize myself actually doing the thing, and like visualize each stage of the process. So for example, there's enamel pins that I want to make right now, like a big series. And enamel pins for some reason scare me, because the first time I did them, it was really successful. And I was like, oh man, I hope I replicate the success again. But every time I've printed enamel pins, they have sold pretty well. But I'm like, I get afraid of like the next idea is not going to be good enough. But I just came up with an idea recently that I think is really cool. And I spoke out loud about it with friends, and they were like, that's really cool. I like that. So I'm like, okay, I know that's something that's good. And so I'm like, okay, like now, like, why am I not doing it? I'm not sitting down and doing it. I'm like, okay, I think about myself sitting down at my computer, doing the line art, putting in the color, like actually like, getting the formatting correct with the enamel pins. Like, how many colors am I going to use? So like, I'm actually thinking about each part of the process and thinking about me actually sitting in the chair, drawing on my computer, actually doing each part of the phases. And that helps like dislodge that block in my head, because I'm like, okay, this task is possible. Sending it out is possible. Producing these pins is possible. And it makes it a little bit less scary. So that's how I kind of get over my fears, to visualize each stage of the process. And so everybody else has different techniques. So, you know, in the comments in the chat, if you're just listening, write down like how, like tell us how you kind of work through your fear, or how you work alongside your fear. And because I'd be really interested to hear other techniques, because like, again, each thing that people try is what works for them. And it's always nice to get ideas too. So yeah, let's all work on dispelling our fears and kind of like understanding it and learning it and working with it.
And keep
What
creating.
matters, yeah, what matters is that we're creating.
Yeah.
So we have to keep creating. And if you feel tired or you feel burnt out, that's okay to step away from it, but hopefully you can come back to it with a better perspective and create again. But yeah, man, I'm all motivated now.
Yeah, me too. I know. Let's do it.
I'm like, man, I'm gonna start sketching out my pins.
Yes, I want to see them. See you better.
Yeah, it's gonna be fun. I am looking forward to this idea. Yeah. So yeah, I think that's this episode. Yeah, that's pretty good. So thank you so much for joining us in chat. If you want to join the conversation, please join our Facebook group, Painted in Color Podcast Discussion Group, and join us on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, whatever platform you use. We would love to hear from you, and please feel free to subscribe and follow us too, and see notifications for when new episodes are going to happen. But it's every other Monday at 12 p.m. CST, 10 a.m. PST, and hopefully we'll see you around here. Thank you for joining us. Bye, everybody.